and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we take our favorite books off the shelf, dust them off, and remember why it is we love them so. My name's Tom Galley. Joining me today, we've got Tony Pasculi.
Thanks for having me.
And what are we up to today, Tony?
Today we're reading a Connie Willis novel called Passage. And this is a book about NDEs, near-death experiences. The main character is a researcher studying NDEs for reasons, and she meets another guy who's studying NDEs for other reasons, and there's a third character running around studying NDEs for yet a distinct set of reasons. Yeah.
And always the big question, the leading question here, why is this a favorite?
Excuse me. I just love Connie Willis's writing. She's kind of amazing. And this is not my favorite piece of her writing, but it's as we talked about last time, it's like I wanted to pick Connie Willis. I wanted to pick something that was representative. But this is a book that I enjoy quite a bit. I've read it several times. I remember the first time I read it, I started recommending it to everyone I knew. It's like, oh, you have to read this book. Because I thought it was just terrific. And I've come back to it a couple of times. But there's something about Connie Willis characters that I really enjoy. Above and beyond the story of this particular book, there's a sort of character which belongs in a Connie Willis novel or short story, which is sort of it's a marriage of the hyper competent protagonist of Golden Age sci-fi mixed with the absolute romantic befuddlement of someone in a rom-com. And I really enjoy that combination. It is fun. It is lighthearted. It's good fun. Even though this is a very serious book, it doesn't feel like a serious book tonally because the characters are so enjoyable and pleasant. And most of their problems, until they get very, very dark and very serious, are kind of lighthearted problems of being stuck in a stairwell because someone they don't want to talk to is right outside. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just really enjoy it. Yeah.
Fair enough. So this is certainly my first time through the book, and I'm not certain, but I think it's my first experience with the author as well.
So I'm very curious to see what you thought of the book.
That's a complex question to answer, or it's a simple question. It's a complex answer. When I first started getting into the book, I just found it delightful. Mm-hmm. It was everything about it was fun. The description of the hospital. Now, large hospitals are like this, right? They are convoluted mazes that are designed to ensnare you, like the Minotaur. You're not supposed to be able to escape once you're inside. And it becomes a theme that runs throughout the entire book. And in fact, it later parallels Joanna's experiences with her own NDE to some degree.
Yeah, I think that's deliberate. I think the hospital is a reinforcing metaphor, the layout of the hospital.
Yeah. But that constantly, you can't get there from here.
Yes, exactly.
And
yes.
yet, so and nobody actually knows how to get anywhere until late in the book. Our hero, Richard, is that his name?
I think so.
Actually starts mapping the hospital, which was pretty cool. And yet this, I'll come around to the exception on that. But I mean, that was fun. The characters initially were all fun and delightful. And Richard has amazing pockets. Oh my God. He's got the TARDIS of doctor coats there, because he's pulling out pounds of food and approaching a gallon of liquid. He's got juice bottles and sodas and crackers and apples and oh my God. But he was, they're all fun characters. And like you said, a large part of the early part of the book is them dodging undesirable people. Yeah.
Of which there is no shortage.
There's no shortage. And they're lovable. You've got the old timer who's full of war stories and also potentially full of crap, but you can't get away from them. You've got the sick little girl who you just hate to leave alone, and she milks that deliberately. Yeah, she will do anything to keep somebody in the room just a second longer, just for that humanity, just for that contact.
Which also I think is a metaphor. Yeah, I think all of these. I mean, it's a very deliberately constructed book. Sorry, but go on. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to stop and think about that for a second. But the characters, initially, everything that I like about this book becomes annoying. The further into the book I get, the more one-dimensional every character becomes, until they are skipping. They're a record that's skipping and hitting the same groove over and over and over again, and I'm just tired of it. Jiminy Christmas, you can't figure out how to get to ER from your office. You've been doing it all book long. I'm not buying it anymore. There's no aspect of the book that doesn't just get reiterated into a level of annoyance for me.
That's the thing I noticed this time, and I was wondering, and you picked up on it in your first read. It took me several reads before this read through, I finally got to that point where the book was like, this is very repetitive. Yeah. I'm just like, I'm getting tired with this repetition. Can we move on from this, please? But like I say, I think it's very deliberate on Connie Willis's part. I think all right, we have to break into the spoilers here to talk about what's going to happen at the end. So it turns out that Joanna, who's our main character, and since we've already broken the spoiler seal, let's say this: it is fascinating to me that the main character dies about 2/3 of the way through the book.
And persists in being in the rest of the book.
Yes. But she's dead. She is, we still get some of her experience, but we're not clear on what that is. She's going through an NDE experience, but she no longer interacts with anyone else in the book. They're trying to figure out what happened to her and what her final message means. But she's gone. Yeah. That's amazing.
The structure of that bothers me, but I don't want to derail wherever you're going.
So what I was going to say, we're talking about the repetition. So the message, one of the messages is that the NDE, which it turns out, okay, I think we have to back up and explain a thing, that Richard has his research, or Joanna's research, is interviewing people who have had near-death experiences. They were in a motorcycle accident and they saw a white light and and she talks to them as soon as possible afterwards to find out what their experience was, collect common details, and she's trying to analyze them to see if there's some sort of pattern. And one of her rivals is this guy whose name I can't remember, who's intent on imposing his own paradigm on top of the experiences. And he asks very leading questions because he believes that it's all part of a religious afterlife. And he's one of her main antagonists. Richard, on the other hand, is this guy who is trying to create a synthetic NDE by giving people a specific cocktail of drugs. And it puts the brain in a similar state, which is not actually dangerous, so you don't die, but you experience what is an NDE. And Joanna, an NDE researcher, gets to go under and have this experience firsthand several times. And she has like a repeating dream where she's on the Titanic, and the Titanic is going down, and time is inevitably marching forward. She has to try to get to a certain point to figure out what's happening. And every time she stays down, she explores more and more of the sinking ship. And she's desperate to find out what this means and why it's a Titanic. Why is it always a Titanic?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and she slips into a very unscientific behavior and starts ascribing the Titanic to other people's visions.
Yes, she does.
When other people, whatever it is other people describe,
My apologies.
she finds a way to...
So that was Siri joining the podcast. Siri on my Apple Watch. Let me disable her. There we go.
It was inevitable. Right? But whatever it is that the other people say, she finds a way to twist those words so that they reinforce her belief that everybody's going to the Titanic.
Yes.
Which is amongst the earlier things that start to annoy me about her. She becomes very unscientific. The farther into this book we get, the less scientisty she becomes.
Yeah, she does back away from that, and she figures out, as she starts to figure out what she thinks the Titanic means, she starts seeing other people's experiences as not some version of her Titanic, but some version of something parallel to the Titanic, which is a disaster. And ultimately, what the Titanic is, it turns out, is a metaphor. It's the brain trying to send a signal to the outside. It's like, help, I'm going down, I'm dying. It's trying to send a signal to the rest of the body of like, hold on until someone can rescue you. It's all the neurotransmitters going boom, 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 boom. Start the heart, try anything, throw everything at it. Throw lifeboats in the water, shoot up a flare, sound the alarm, flash the SOS or the signal lights, get on the radio, send every signal you can. That's what the NDE experience is, she ultimately decides.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's the message they're trying to decode at the end. When she dies, she says, it's an SOS. Yeah. I forget where I was going with this. Oh, yes. So what Connie Willis has done here is she's created this metaphor for the process of dying and what it means and why people see the things that they do in these NDEs. And this is why I say the book is constructed very deliberately, and why you sort of almost don't appreciate that the first time you read it, except unless it becomes repetitive for you, which it did, is that metaphor is reinforced throughout. So the layout of the hospital is you can't get a message out. You can't reach anyone in the hospital. No one ever responds to a page. Yeah, you can't reach anyone. As you said, you can't get there from here. Once you're on the other side, you can't get back to here. Once you're in the ER, you can't get to anywhere else. Once you're not in the ER, you can't get back to the ER. You can't transition easily from side to side. With Maisie, she's also that. She's like desperately trying to hang on to life and not be left alone, essentially dead by herself. Yeah, she's like, stay. And nothing she can do will allow her to hang on to people. They slip away. It's inevitable. Yeah, I think that's kind of fascinating. But at the same time, it does kind of wear, because it just gets hammered. It gets hammered.
And every character becomes they're effectively repeating the same line over and over again.
They really are.
I mean, she finds extra words to do it with, but it's always the same thing. You've got the religious doctor. It's a religious experience. It's a religious experience. You've got Maisie. Don't let me go. Don't let me go. You've got the old timer. Story. And it just gets narrower and narrower and more overtly repetitive. And they indulge in this. When Joanna finds the English professor, who's bordering, partly senile, and his daughter's taking care of him. It's like, oh, I must call the daughter right this moment because I had a thought. 2 pages later, oh, I must call the daughter right this moment because I just had 4 times in a row. She's calling this poor woman who's a full-time caretaker for her senile dad, to say, okay, I need you to research all the messages the Titanic sent. Okay, forget that. I need you to find out if there are fireplaces on the Titanic. Okay, forget that. I need to find out if there's a garden on the Titanic,
This time through, and I still enjoyed reading it this time through, but it did start to grate on me a lot more this time after having appreciated it the first several times I read it. I thought it really could have been shorter. It could have accomplished a lot of this. This could have been a novella, and this would have been a lovely novella, which would have cut out a lot of that repetition and just race through this thing and experience it just one time through. Just hit those beats once each and move on. Yeah.
Well, I don't get the impression I didn't enjoy it. I did enjoy the read, but, it started out, it was just charming. It was so much fun to read. And the more that got taken away from me, the more there was a compound annoyance. I was beginning to get annoyed with elements of the book individually, and I was beginning to get annoyed with the book as a whole for promising to be so charming and then failing to deliver,
Yes. Yeah. The resentment of, but you started so good. Why are you doing this? Yeah. I'm gonna sort of go off topic here and recommend a short story to you. It is Blued Moon.
Okay.
Blued Moon. That is actually my favorite piece of Connie Willis writing, and it's a very short story, and it is most of the delight and a lot less of the repetition about a completely different topic. And it features very similar characters who are wonderfully quirky, staggeringly intelligent, and hopelessly incompetent when it comes to affairs of the heart. Yeah. So well worth reading. So anything you like about this, I think you'll find in that short story, and anything you don't like about this, I think you will not.
Okay.
So
we'll move with that.
Yeah.
Let's see. One of the recurring questions I had, what does Joanna do at the hospital?
She's an NDE researcher.
But that's... So when we're first introduced to Joanna, she's overworked and running behind. Yeah. She hasn't done this. She's got to go talk to, there's a list of things she hasn't done. But they tell us how often there are NDEs in the hospital, and the answer is not all that.
Not all that often. Yeah.
You know, once there was 3 in a day, but they also go weeks without having any. So what is it that's occupying her time? How is she so completely overwhelmed and distressingly, aflutter trying to catch up to the nothing that her workload seems to be?
That's a good point. So I would say her workload intensifies enormously once Richard enters the picture, because then she has this other full-time project on top of her existing work. But up until that point, I would say her workload, well, her characterization as overworked continually behind is a little bit tropey. It's like that's who Willis wants the character to be, and not so much, that's what the actual
But her entire
ramifications of her.
workload seems to consist of not transcribing recordings,
Yep.
getting lost in the hospital,
Yeah.
and avoiding, the half a dozen unpleasant characters who, even though you can't get anywhere in the hospital, always seem to be in the way of where she's trying to get. There are choke points in this hospital.
Yes.
And that's where the trolls live.
This hospital is basically the Winchester Mystery House.
Mm.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's ridiculous. It's assembled in much that same way. I think they talk about it being built, and then there was like another building next to it, and they decided to join them together, but only on certain floors. And yeah,
well, Queens Hospital is much like that. It was originally multiple buildings that literally, they bought the property next to them, and then they built some building in between the 2 buildings, and it's very easy to get very lost in there.
So just based on my reading, I would say that probably half of her workday is just trying to get from here to there in the hospital. And then maybe another half of her workday is avoiding people that she doesn't want to talk to in the hospital. That leaves her very behind on transcribing her recordings and interviewing subjects.
Now, one thing one thing I thoroughly appreciated, the character that nobody wants to talk to, and the guy that's doing the religious based.
The other researcher.
I can't remember his name, and that's probably significant that neither of us can remember his name. But I love the fact, you question, why is he there? He's there because there's a rich donor who believes what he's talking about, who's giving money to the hospital so that he can do his research.
Yes.
Right. He's not a qualified scientist or doctor, I don't think. They never tell us that he is.
But he's a published author.
He's a published author, and he has the ear of a wealthy benefactor.
Yes.
Who herself gets involved in trying to convert Joanna to this thing, only once or twice. She doesn't really enter into the story. But I love the fact that there was a reason for this religious nut job, to not only be there, but to have a position of eminence in the hospital.
Mr. Mandrake. Is his name.
Mr. Mandrake.
Yeah, Maurice Mandrake. Yeah, that's a weird name. It's strange that it's not memorable.
Maybe it's just because I want to forget him.
Maybe. Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that was really nice. The fact that, we have an antagonist, or at least an obstacle, who's got a legit reason for being there. And it's the sort of reason that's quite believable, right?
Yeah.
She's struggling for funding to get her NDE. He is not struggling for funding because he's got a wealthy patron.
So talking about demands on Joanna's time, she's constantly turning off her pager because Mandrake is constantly is badgering her to talk to her about some NDE experience that he wants to share with her, or some new evidence that he has that proves this religious experience. So that's one of the things she spends her time doing, is fending off his advances, his research advances. Also, she spends a lot of time fending off Maisie, who wants her to come in and talk about disasters like the Hindenburg. And also there's another patient who has an NDE who sort of completely goes over to Mandrake's side. And every time she thinks about it, she has another confirming religious detail. And she also feels compelled to share all of this with Joanna and say, I just thought of something else. The angel was there and he was wearing this. Yeah. And that proves it. Right. And it's like, yeah. So these people are just, sort of really competing for her time. So she is kind of being pulled in multiple directions at once. Embraced by the Light is one of Mr. Mr. Mandrake's books.
There's a neat thing, in my mind, it's a neat thing that they mention more than once in the book. Back in I think it was during the French Revolution, but this doctor at the time, Lavoisier, was beheaded.
Yes.
But, he had said, I will continue to blink for as long as I'm conscious, because he was a doctor or scientist, at least past for one in those ages till the end.
Yeah.
Blinked 12 times. I really want to know if that's real. That would be so fantastic if that was real.
I believe that's a true story. Of course, it's based on eyewitness accounts at the time, whether those can be believed. And then, of course, whether that actually indicates anything or there's just some sort of galvanic response of his eyelids were twitching because, all his neurotransmitters were draining out of his body. So
and these are questions that Joanna asks herself later in the book. How quickly was he blinking? What do we know that means?
Yeah, and they hadn't established a pattern beyond just blinking as many times. It's like I will blink a double blink and then one up, one down, and then the other one, and then
left, right, left, right, left, right. Anything that would be just not random twitch.
Exactly. But I guess if you're about to be executed, you don't have a lot of time to plan. So yeah. I did also enjoy a lot of Maisie's detail on disasters. I mean, she's like the in a different book, she would be the expert on dinosaurs, right?
Mm-hmm,
the one that goes in and corrects the, like in Jurassic Park in the novel, there's a kid who comes into the Natural History Museum in Chicago and says, your T-Rex is wrong. And they're like, oh, come on, don't do that. You're a child. And it's like, no, he's right. We built it wrong and we just haven't fixed it yet. So Maisie is that, only not with dinosaurs, but with disasters. She's got all the facts on the Hindenburg. She's, the name of the guy and his dog who survived. The guy who had an NDE experience hanging onto the side of the Hindenburg, whose hands basically caught fire, but he wouldn't let go, and that's why he lived. The Great Molasses Flood. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful details. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's believable that she's drawn to that given her condition,
Yeah. So she's dying and everyone around her, because she's a child, is relentlessly upbeat and completely untruthful. And she can't abide that. And so she just drives her farther and farther into pursuing her disaster studies.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that dog tags, because one of her horrible things is, they found this girl, the circus fire that was never claimed. Nobody ever stepped up. Nobody knows who she belonged to, who she was. And that terrifies her, the thought that she could be, dead and nobody know who she is.
That was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That was heartbreaking. Yeah. And so Joanna gets her a set of dog tags so she can just relax because she's okay with death. This little girl is perfectly okay with death. She expects to die. She's much more okay with death than anyone else in the novel. Yeah. But she's not okay with being anonymous in death. Yeah. There's another moment that I really liked. Let's see. Is it? That's why you have to go, so you can become a disasterologist. That is not it. Oh, this is, so Joanna befriends this woman who's the caretaker of her old high school English teacher, whose name I can't remember, either of their names, and is pestering her because she wants to get some information because she remembers a book that was on his desk when he was talking about the Titanic, and it triggered a thought in her brain, and all she has is this weird sort of, I think it's important, but I don't know what it is. And like you say, she sends this woman on this just bizarre quest to find this textbook, but she does end up inviting this woman out to, what's their movie night called? It has a special name.
Yeah, it did have a special name, but
it's not like girls' night or something, but it's something along those lines. Yeah. It's not called movie night. Anyway, so they get together, they do a double feature, and they don't talk about work, and they eat popcorn. And usually it's just Joanna and her friend who works in the ER. And they invite this woman along, and this is what she has to say about Joanna after Joanna passes away. She told me she wished she could die saving somebody's life, and she did. She saved mine because this woman was wasting away, devoting herself to taking care of her father with dementia. And this is literally the first time she'd been out of the house in years. And Joanna turned her on to this idea of elder care. Said someone will come in and sit with your father for you so you can go out and enjoy a night out and have a life and not just feel like you're trapped in a house with a man who's slowly losing his mind. Literally saved her life, she says. And that's just kind of remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah. No, the book brings up something that failed to work completely for me, right? So there's this idea of that I got introduced to in this book of cryptomnesia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that. There's an M and an N next to each other, which makes it hard to roll off the tongue. But cryptomnesia.
Cryptomnesia. What is that again?
So it is subconsciously learning something. So you're exposed to bits and pieces, and your subconscious mind fabricates it into knowledge that you think you've got no reason to have.
Ah, okay.
And this is what happens. This is what she decides has happened to her with the Titanic, because this English teacher who she had for 1 year used the Titanic as a recurring example as he was teaching his English class. So if she had English class 5 days a week, presumably it would be an hour for a school year, and they're reading stories, poetry. Well, they're all over the place with that. But he keeps coming back to this idea of the Titanic as an example to support whatever it is they're reading, or to contradict whatever they're reading. He has the book, right, which becomes so important. I do not buy that. If it had been a year of the architecture of the Titanic, I don't think she would have absorbed enough information to do the detail that she was doing in her NDEs. But just to have him waving a book around, and as they finished reading the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, said, it's just like on the Titanic when the boilers flooded.
Yeah.
She knows the layout of multiple decks. She knows the contents of rooms that aren't mainstream rooms. She navigates around, in her NDEs, and then goes back and she finds evidence that says she's doing it correctly. She knows how many doors there were in the hallway. She knows where the crew staircase was. I don't see that level of detail coming up from the occasional example that popped up in between lectures on English in a 1-year class.
I forget, had Joanna seen, so this book takes place after the movie Titanic came out.
Yeah, because there are continual references to the movie.
So and I don't remember, this is significant, either she had seen it and could have absorbed some of this information, or she hadn't, because I know she didn't want to watch it a second time, or she didn't want to watch it. I don't know if she didn't want to rewatch it or if she didn't want to watch it for the first time.
I honestly don't remember if she had watched it or not.
Yeah, that seems significant.
It does seem significant. Actually, she hadn't watched it.
She had not,
because she asked her friend about scenes in Titanic, and her friend was like, "We'll just watch it at the next movie night." And she said, "Nope, not doing that. I just want to know if this scene happened or not."
Okay. Because Cameron was famous for recreating the Titanic set in as much accurate detail as possible. So anyone who had seen that movie would have actually a pretty good idea, would have a cryptomnesic access to most of the actual layout of the Titanic.
It's a hard word to say, isn't it?
It is.
The M and the N next to each other really, really thwart the tongue.
It's the O that's throwing me off. If it was cryptamnesia, then I can say amnesia. That's easy. Yeah. But cryptomnesia sounds weird to me. Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that was stretching credulity to have her. It really seemed like it was building towards the Titanic being some sort of objective reality. Not that it was her mind fabricating a thing. The fact that her mind fabricated the Titanic would be fine, but it shouldn't have been that detail accurate. Right?
Yeah.
She should have been finding things like, yeah, sure, Bob was at the telegraph until the end, but the telegraph was actually on the port side of the ship, not the starboard side of the ship, or there should, in my mind, there should have been errors. There not being errors led me to believe that the author wanted me to believe there was something objective going on here, that she and other people were literally sharing the same near-death experience.
It's interesting. This is something I was going to say earlier. I had forgotten. So she's kind of playing this game where this is common in sort of psychological thrillers, where it's like, does this thing have an objective reality, or is it all in the mind? Yeah. And she really wants to keep that tension of whether it's the one or the other. And then, further spoiler, we do actually get some of Joanna's experience after she crosses over to the other side. And what we don't know at that point is whether that is an objective reality of something on the other side, or whether that's just a continuation of her NDA experience and she's experiencing time sort of subjectively drawn out.
Yeah.
But aside from that tension between is it or isn't it, this book is relentlessly atheistic, almost punishingly so. She, there is no, I don't think there's any sympathetic religious figures in here. Mandrake and his ilk, the ones he sways to this idea of a religious NDE, are ridiculed throughout.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And even Joanna, as she's experiencing death, is like, well, this is it. This is death, and I'm dying, and that's it. And I figured out this thing, and I will never be able to share it with anybody because I will be dead, and boom. And there is no afterlife, and I can't pass this on, and that's it. Yeah, it's a little bit grim. I mean, I'm relatively, I don't know how to say it. I don't like to say atheistic because I think people who claim to be atheists tend to be pretty belligerent about it. But agnostic doesn't seem strong enough. But somewhere in there.
I would go with a-religious if I was describing myself.
A-religious is a good word. I am a-religious. Yeah. So who knows what we'll find on the other side? Probably nothing. Yeah.
But structurally, that bothered me a little bit because she dies, and she dies. She's dead. And like you say, about 2/3 of the way through the book. We've got a fair bit of book to go.
Yeah.
And time passes.
Yeah.
They bury her. Weeks go by, friends get together and do things, scientific advances are made. Phenomenal, well, not phenomenal, but I mean, a respectable amount of time passes. And yet we still cut away to side trips to Joanna in the afterlife, or Joanna dying, right?
Yeah.
Her experiences in the NDE, which, now we're time traveling, right?
Yeah.
Because, she's dead. She was embalmed. She was buried. There's no NDE going on anymore, and yet we're still treated to, she's taken that and spread it out, just, dribbled it through the remainder of the novel.
Yeah. And again, that's her trying to have her cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
She's definitely dead, but she's still around.
Yeah. So I'm just going to save those as the author. I'm going to save those and dole them out as we move forward.
It's interesting. That actually reminded me of, because we read it in close proximity, of Blue Event Horizon, where, the guy loses his woman, but not quite. She's effectively dead, but she's not, because she's fallen into a black hole. And even though she's past the event horizon, she will be doing it forever as time goes slower and slower and slower for her.
Yeah. Subjectively for her, it is still in the process of happening.
Exactly.
Right. She's still experiencing shock at the fact that boyfriend has gone and she's still in the black hole.
Yes.
And boyfriend has made and lost a couple of fortunes at this point, But he still feels that guilt because she right now is having that immediate experience of betrayal. Yep.
And he can never get past that because she can never get past that because she's stuck in this time warp. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I just thought that was an interesting parallel. Not deliberate in any way, I don't believe. I meant to look up Connie Willis before we started, because Connie Willis, I believe, is a science fiction grandmaster, one of the few female science fiction grandmasters, which is a big deal. I'm not actually sure what that title means.
It sounds impressive.
It does sound impressive. There are not a lot of them, but it puts her up in the ranks with people like 11 Hugo Awards and 7 Nebula Awards. Good
Jiminy
Lord.
Christmas. That's,
More major
How do I not
SF
know this person? How have I been reading sci-fi so much of my life and not come across this person?
She writes very particular stuff. So she's known for sort of very light comic stuff in her shorter work. She's got a wonderful novel called Bellwether, which is much, much goofier and sillier. It involves research scientists studying the art of persuasion. A bellwether is a sheep that has a bell on it, so that you can identify where it is. But that sheep will tend to just pick a leader, and then if you identify the bellwether, then you just get it to do what you want it to do, and all the other sheep will follow it. And so they're trying to find a similar phenomenon in human beings.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're studying this, and it's very quirky and fun, and very much like Blue Moon. But I haven't read it that many times. But she's a staple at cons. She's written, oh my goodness, she wrote Blackout and All Clear, which won the Hugo Award when that came out. That's a 2-volume novel about time traveling in World War II, where she just did a mountain of research, and it's the closest thing you could read to a historical novel. except that it also involves time travel.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's amazing. So yeah, she's very, very good.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to seek some of this out.
But she's only written 7 novels, but a bunch of novellas and a ton of stories. Yeah. So definitely read Blood Moon. That would be a recommendation.
We'll make that happen.
Oh, Firewatch is good too. Which won the Hugo and the Nebula. Good Lord.
That is usually a good recommendation.
Yeah. If you hit both of those, yeah. Yep.
All right.
Anything else? I got nothing.
You know, we've pretty much covered the various things on here. I've got a couple of other notes, but they're redundant with, of course, with the way the book is written. Maybe some redundancy is.
Probably, yeah.
Nope, I'm good.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, again, I enjoyed this overall as a first read for the author and the book itself. I don't think this will make it on my favorites list, but I certainly am looking forward to looking up some more Connie and seeing what else she has to offer.
Yeah. Yeah. She's very talented. Yeah.
All right. Well, for my next choice, we are definitely going to stick with my broken character predilection here. I am going to go with A Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick.
Ooh, I have never read A Scanner Darkly.
Oh, most excellent. Most excellent.
I have seen the film adaptation, which I think is probably the best PKD film adaptation.
I think it is, without a doubt, the best film adaptation I've ever seen.
Wow. Okay.
It is faithful.
Yeah.
In every way it can be faithful to the written material.
Not having read the source, I can't speak to that, but just based on the quality of the film itself, I'm inclined to agree.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll see further discussion on that.
All right. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.